The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of Windsor as Sarah Mitchell hurried toward the castle grounds. Her clipboard clutched tightly against her chest. She dodged between early morning joggers and dog walkers who had no idea that today would become one of the most memorable days in British history. Sarah had been working as an event coordinator for 3 years, but nothing had prepared her for the scale of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations. The pageant finale was scheduled for that evening, and every detail had to be perfect. Thousands of performers, millions of viewers, and dignitaries from around the world would witness what was being called the grandest celebration of the monarch's 70-year reign. As she reached the main gate, her phone buzzed with yet another urgent message. The weather forecast had changed overnight, threatening rain for the outdoor ceremony. The backup plans would need to be reviewed, sound equipment waterproofed, and seating arrangements possibly modified. Sarah's team had worked tirelessly for months, but Mother Nature seemed determined to test their resolve. Inside the coordination tent, chaos reigned supreme. Maps covered every available surface, radio chatter filled the air, and volunteers rushed back and forth with last-minute updates. James Thompson, the lead coordinator, spotted Sarah immediately and waved her over with obvious relief. "Thank goodness you're here," he said, his usually calm demeanor showing cracks of stress. "We've got 3 major issues that need immediate attention. The horse parade is running behind schedule. The children's choir from Manchester hasn't arrived yet, and the security team wants to review all access points again." Sarah nodded, already mentally prioritizing the problems. The horse parade was crucial to the opening sequence, featuring magnificent steeds from the Royal Mews alongside cavalry units from across the Commonwealth. Any delay would have a domino effect on the entire program. She grabbed her radio and began coordinating with the stable masters. Meanwhile, across London, 8-year-old Emma Watson was experiencing the most exciting day of her young life. Selected from thousands of applicants to represent her school in the children's choir, she had been practicing the special Jubilee song for months. Her voice, clear and sweet, had impressed the music directors during auditions, earning her a solo verse that would be heard by millions. Emma's mother, Claire, watched nervously as the bus filled with children from various schools across Manchester. The journey to Windsor would take several hours, and she prayed that traffic wouldn't make them late. This opportunity meant everything to Emma, who had been dreaming of singing for the Queen since she learned about the auditions. The bus driver, a cheerful man named Robert, assured the parents that he knew several alternate routes. He had been driving for special events for over 20 years and understood the importance of punctuality. As the bus pulled away from the school, Emma pressed her face against the window, watching her hometown disappear as they headed toward their royal appointment. Back at Windsor, the performers were beginning to arrive in waves. Dancers from Scotland brought traditional Highland dress, their kilts pristine and bagpipes polished to perfection. African drum groups unpacked instruments that had traveled thousands of miles to be part of the celebration. Caribbean steel bands tuned their drums under the careful supervision of their conductors. The diversity of the performers reflected the modern Commonwealth, showcasing cultures from every continent. Each group had their own story of how they came to be selected, their own dreams of performing for the monarch who had been a constant presence throughout their lives. Sarah found herself marveling at the logistics involved, feeding over 2,000 performers, coordinating their rehearsals, ensuring everyone knew their cues and positions. It was like conducting a symphony where every musician spoke a different language and came from a different musical tradition. As midday approached, the first rehearsal began. Without the Queen present, they used a stand-in to mark her position and timing. The pageant told the story of Britain through the decades, beginning with the austere post-war years and progressing through the cultural revolutions, technological advances, and social changes that had defined the Queen's reign. Sarah watched from the control booth as the opening sequence unfolded. Military bands marched in perfect formation, while vintage cars carried actors representing different eras. The swinging 60s segment featured dancers in mod dresses and Beatles music, while the 80s brought neon colors and electronic sounds that echoed across the grounds. Everything seemed to be flowing smoothly until disaster struck during the Millennium segment. A technical malfunction caused the elaborate light display to flicker and die, leaving the dancers performing in near darkness. The backup generators kicked in, but the delicate timing had been disrupted. Sarah's heart sank as she realized the complexity of fixing this issue. The lighting design had taken months to program, with each sequence timed to the second. The technicians immediately began troubleshooting, but with only hours until the live performance, there was no room for error. James appeared at her shoulder, his face grim. "How long do the tech team need?" he asked. "At least 2 hours for a full reset," came the response through the radio. "Maybe longer if we need to replace any of the main control units." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, running through alternatives in her mind. They could simplify the lighting, use more traditional spotlights, or even perform that segment in daylight. None of these options matched the spectacular vision they had planned, but they would ensure the show could go on. As the afternoon wore on, news began filtering in from various sources. The Prime Minister had arrived and was being briefed on security arrangements. International media crews were setting up their equipment, with camera positions that would capture every angle of the performance. Social media was already buzzing with anticipation, as early arrivals shared photos and speculation about what surprises the evening might hold. In a quiet corner of the grounds, away from the organized chaos of preparation, an elderly gentleman sat on a bench feeding pigeons. Most passers-by assumed he was simply a local resident taking advantage of the free entertainment. They had no idea that he was actually Lord Pemberton, one of the Queen's oldest friends and confidants who had been quietly observing the preparations on her behalf. Lord Pemberton had attended every major royal celebration for the past 50 years. He understood better than most the pressure these events placed on everyone involved, from the highest-ranking officials to the youngest performers. His presence was both a blessing and a responsibility. He would report back to the Queen about every detail, every triumph, and every mistake. As evening approached, the final technical checks began. Sound levels were tested and adjusted, camera angles verified, and security sweeps completed. The performers gathered in their designated areas, nervous energy crackling through the air like electricity before storm. Sarah stood at the control center, surrounded by monitors showing feeds from dozens of cameras. Her headset crackled with reports from team leaders across the site. The lighting issue had been resolved, though not perfectly. Some of the more complex effects had been simplified, but the overall impact would still be spectacular. The gates opened to the public at 6 o'clock, and thousands of people began streaming onto the grounds. Families who had traveled from across the country, veterans wearing their service medals with pride, children clutching small Union Jack flags, all united in their excitement to be part of this historic celebration. Emma and her fellow choir members had arrived safely, despite a brief delay caused by traffic around London. They were now in position behind the main stage, their white dresses and blue sashes creating a sea of innocence and hope. Emma's mother watched from the designated family area, her phone ready to capture every precious moment. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over Windsor Castle, the final countdown began. In exactly 1 hour, the pageant would commence, telling the story of 7 decades of change, growth, and continuity under the reign of Elizabeth II. But none of the thousands of people present that evening knew about the conversation that had taken place in a private sitting room within the castle just hours earlier. A conversation that would transform this already special event into something truly extraordinary, creating memories that would last far beyond the final notes of the national anthem. The pageant began precisely at 7 o'clock with the thunderous sound of ceremonial cannons echoing across the Windsor grounds. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat as the opening notes of Rule Britannia filled the evening air, performed by the combined military bands positioned around the main stage. From her control position, she watched as the first wave of performers took their places. The Royal Horse Guards led the procession, their black horses stepping in perfect unison while their riders sat motionless as statues. Behind them came representatives from every branch of the armed forces, their uniforms telling the story of British military tradition spanning centuries. The crowd fell silent as the narrator's voice boomed through the sound system, beginning the journey through time that would define the evening. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather tonight to celebrate 7 decades of service, 7 decades of change, and 7 decades of unwavering dedication to the people of Britain and the Commonwealth. Emma stood with her choir behind the stage, her small hands clasped tightly together. They wouldn't perform until the final segment, but she couldn't resist peeking around the curtain to catch glimpses of the spectacular show unfolding. The costumes were even more magnificent than she had imagined during rehearsals, and the lights created magical patterns across the castle walls. The first segment transported the audience back to 1952, the year of the Queen's accession to the throne. Dancers dressed in austere post-war clothing moved across the stage, while a vintage Rolls-Royce carried actors representing the young royal couple. The music was somber yet hopeful, reflecting a nation rebuilding itself after the devastation of World War II. As the years progressed through the performance, the mood began to shift. The late 1950s brought the first hints of cultural change, with rock and roll music causing some of the older performers to tap their feet despite themselves. The audience laughed as dancers in poodle skirts and leather jackets brought energy and rebellion to the previously formal atmosphere. Sarah monitored the timing carefully, knowing that each segment had to flow seamlessly into the next. The 1960s explosion was perfectly executed, with the Beatles' music drawing cheers from the crowd as dancers in mauve dresses and bright colors celebrated the cultural revolution that had made London the center of the world's attention. In the VIP seating area, dignitaries from around the world watched with obvious appreciation. The Australian Prime Minister leaned over to whisper something to the Canadian representative, both smiling at the clever way the performance incorporated Commonwealth achievements alongside British milestones. Every few minutes, cameras panned across their faces, capturing their reactions for the global television audience. Meanwhile, in a private room overlooking the grounds, Queen Elizabeth II sat quietly watching the performance on a television screen. At 96 years old, she had officially retired from public appearances 6 months earlier, passing most of her ceremonial duties to other members of the royal family. The decision had been difficult but necessary, as her health could no longer support the demanding schedule she had maintained for decades. Beside her sat her personal secretary, Margaret Fleming, a woman who had served the royal household for over 30 years. Margaret understood the Queen's moods better than almost anyone, and she could see the wistfulness in her employer's eyes as the pageant unfolded. "It's magnificent, Your Majesty," Margaret said softly. "The performers have outdone themselves." The Queen nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving the screen. "They have indeed. I can see the love and effort that has gone into every detail." She paused, watching as the 1970s segment began with dancers representing the diverse cultures that had enriched British society. "I wish I could be there to thank them personally." Margaret had been expecting this comment. She had watched the Queen struggle with the decision to remain absent from the finale, knowing how much these public celebrations meant to both the monarch and her people. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "there might still be a way." The Queen turned to look at her secretary with raised eyebrows. "Whatever do you mean?" "The performance doesn't end until 9:30, Margaret explained. "Your doctor said short appearances were still possible with proper precautions. The crowd doesn't expect to see you, so your presence would be a surprise," the Queen finished, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "But, Margaret, we've made no preparations. Security hasn't been briefed for my attendance, and the event coordinators aren't expecting any changes to their program." Margaret pulled out her phone discreetly. "Leave that to me, Your Majesty. If you're truly interested, I can make the necessary arrangements without disrupting the performance." Down at the pageant, the 1980 segment was in full swing. Dancers in neon colors moved to synthesized music while video screens displayed images of technological advancement and social change. The audience particularly enjoyed the segment featuring the wedding of Charles and Diana, with performers recreating the fairy tale atmosphere that had captivated the world decades earlier. Sarah noticed that the crowd seemed more engaged than usual, their energy feeding back to the performers and creating an atmosphere of genuine celebration rather than mere spectacle. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, waving flags and cheering at particularly impressive moments. Veterans in the special seating area sang along with familiar songs, their voices carrying memories of decades past. Emma's section leader gave the choir their final instructions as the 1990 segment began. Remember, we don't perform until after the New Millennium segment. Stay quiet, stay together, and when our time comes, sing like you've never sung before. The children nodded solemnly, understanding the magnitude of the moment they were about to be part of. Emma felt butterflies in her stomach, but also a strange sense of calm. All the months of practice had led to this one evening, and she was determined to make her school and her family proud. The performance continued to build momentum as it approached the modern era. The Millennium segment, despite the earlier technical difficulties, proceeded flawlessly. The simplified lighting still created spectacular effects as dancers celebrated technological advancement and global connectivity. Giant screens displayed messages from Commonwealth leaders, each offering congratulations and reflecting on the Queen's impact on their nations. As the 2000 segment began, featuring everything from the London Olympics to technological revolution, Margaret Fleming was making discreet phone calls from a castle. Her first call was to the head of royal security, explaining the situation and requesting immediate but subtle preparations for the Queen's potential appearance. Her second call was to James Thompson in the coordination tent. "James, this is Margaret Fleming from the royal household. I need to speak with you immediately about a possible change to this evening's program." James nearly dropped his radio when he recognized the voice. Margaret Fleming rarely called event coordinators directly unless something of utmost importance was happening. "Of course, Miss Fleming. How can I assist you?" Her Majesty is watching the performance and is deeply moved by what she sees. She's considering making a brief appearance at the conclusion of the pageant. This would be entirely unofficial and unannounced. Can your team accommodate such a change? James felt his heart rate double as the implications hit him. The Queen's surprise appearance would be the most significant moment in the event's history, but it would also require split-second coordination with security, media, and crowd management. "We can absolutely make it work," he said, his mind already racing through the logistics. What would Her Majesty require? Simply a clear path to the main stage area and perhaps a brief moment to address the performers and audience. Nothing elaborate, nothing that would disrupt your closing ceremony. "Consider it done," James replied, already signaling to Sarah that they needed to talk immediately. Back on stage, the performance was entering its final phase. The 2010 segment celebrated cultural diversity, environmental awareness, and technological innovation. Performers from dozens of countries moved in choreographed patterns that represented global connectivity and shared values. The music swelled as images of recent royal celebrations filled the massive screens. Sarah rushed over to James, her mind still focused on the technical aspects of the current performance. "What's so urgent?" she asked, not taking her eyes off the monitors. "We might be having a very special guest for the finale," James said quietly. "Her Majesty is considering making an appearance." Sarah's clipboard clattered to the ground as the full impact of this news hit her. The Queen hadn't been expected to attend, which meant no special protocols were in place, no designated positions for royal arrival, and no preparation for what would undoubtedly become the most memorable moment of the entire celebration. "When?" she managed to ask. "Possibly during the closing ceremony. We need to be ready for anything." As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah's radio crackled with a message from the security team. Additional personnel were being discreetly positioned around the grounds, and access routes were being cleared for a possible VIP arrival. The message was coded, but experienced event coordinators like Sarah understood exactly what it meant. The current segment was building to its climax, celebrating the resilience and adaptability that had defined the early 21st century. As it concluded, the stage was reset for the final portion of the evening, the children's choir performance that would lead into the closing ceremony. Emma felt her heart racing as she and her fellow singers were guided toward their positions. The audience seemed to sense that something special was about to happen, though they couldn't quite identify what had changed in the atmosphere. Conversations became more animated, phones were raised to capture every moment, and people began standing to get better views of the stage. In her private room, Queen Elizabeth II made her decision. "Margaret, please inform them that I will attend. Brief appearance only, but I want to thank these remarkable people for their dedication and talent." Margaret smiled as she reached for her phone to set the most extraordinary surprise of the evening into motion. The children's choir took their positions on the main stage as the sun finally disappeared behind Windsor Castle, leaving the grounds illuminated by thousands of carefully positioned lights. Emma stood in the front row, her white dress pristine and her blue sash catching the gentle breeze. Around her, 47 other children from schools across the United Kingdom prepared to perform the specially commissioned song that would serve as the emotional centerpiece of the evening's finale. Sarah watched from the control booth as her team worked frantically behind the scenes to prepare for the Queen's potential arrival. The security detail had been briefed, additional lighting had been positioned near the main entrance, and camera crews were being discreetly repositioned to capture every angle of what could become a historic moment. The audience fell into respectful silence as the choir's music director, Mrs. Helen Crawford, raised her baton. She had spent 30 years teaching children to sing, but nothing in her experience compared to the magnitude of this moment. The children she conducted tonight would remember this performance for the rest of their lives, and she was determined to make it perfect. The opening notes of Through the Years floated across the grounds, a hauntingly beautiful melody that had been composed specifically for this celebration. The song told the story of Britain's journey through 7 decades, touching on moments of triumph and challenge, growth and reflection. As the children's voices joined in harmony, even the most cynical observers felt tears forming in their eyes. Emma's solo verse approached, and she stepped forward slightly as she had practiced countless times. Her clear, sweet voice carried across the grounds as she sang about hope and continuity, about the connections that bind generations together. Her mother, Claire, stood in the family section with her hands clasped tightly together, hardly daring to breathe as her daughter's voice filled the evening air. Meanwhile, in a black sedan approaching the main entrance, Queen Elizabeth II sat quietly as her personal protection team conducted final security checks. She wore a simple but elegant blue dress and a pearl necklace that had been a gift from her late husband. Despite her advanced age, her posture remained regal and her eyes alert as she observed the crowds gathered outside the gates. "Your Majesty," said Inspector Williams, head of her security detail, "we can approach the stage from the eastern pathway, which will keep us away from the main crowd until the final moment. Ms. Fleming has confirmed that the event coordinators are prepared for your arrival." The Queen nodded thoughtfully. "I want this to be natural and unforced. The evening belongs to these remarkable performers, not to me. We must ensure that our presence enhances rather than disrupts their celebration." Back in the control booth, James Thompson was coordinating the most complex few minutes of his career. His earpiece carried constant updates from security teams, technical crews, and stage managers. The children's performance was proceeding flawlessly, but in approximately 8 minutes, the most famous woman in the world would be arriving unannounced to join them on stage. "Camera 7, be ready to pick up movement from the eastern entrance," he whispered into his microphone. "Lighting crew, stand by to illuminate pathway 3 on my signal. Sarah, are you receiving updates from the Royal Security Team?" Sarah's voice crackled back through the radio. "All teams are in position. The Queen's arrival is confirmed for during the final verse of the choir piece. She'll approach from stage left and position herself beside the children." As Emma and her fellow singers continued their performance, several members of the audience began to notice increased activity around the periphery of the grounds. Additional security personnel had appeared, though they remained discreet and professional. Camera operators were adjusting their equipment, and there seemed to be an electricity in the air that hadn't been there moments before. Lord Pemberton, still sitting on his bench in the observation area, allowed himself a small smile. He had suspected that the Queen might not be able to resist attending her own celebration, despite her official retirement from public appearances. As one of her oldest friends, he understood her deep sense of duty and her genuine affection for the people who had served her throughout her reign. The children's song reached its crescendo as all 48 voices joined together in a harmony that seemed to echo off the ancient stone walls of Windsor Castle. The lyrics spoke of unity, tradition, and hope for the future, themes that had defined the Queen's entire reign. As the music swelled, even the performers themselves seemed transported by the beauty of the moment. Margaret Fleming, now positioned near the stage with her phone constantly buzzing with updates, watched as the royal sedan approached the designated entrance. Everything was proceeding according to the hastily arranged plan, but she knew that the next few minutes would require split-second timing and considerable luck. Emma's final solo approached, the verse that would conclude the children's performance and set up the evening's grand finale. She had practiced these words hundreds of times, but as she prepared to sing them with Windsor Castle as her backdrop and thousands of people listening, she felt a sense of purpose and pride that surprised her with its intensity. Through the years of joy and sorrow, through the changes time has brought, we stand united in tomorrow, bound by all that you have taught, she sang, her voice carrying clearly across the grounds. The audience responded with spontaneous applause that built gradually as the other children joined her for the final chorus. As the choir's performance reached its conclusion, Sarah received the message she had been waiting for. Royal arrival in 60 seconds crackled through her earpiece. All teams stand by for Operation Surprise. The audience erupted in sustained applause as the children's choir took their bows, their faces glowing with pride and accomplishment. Mrs. Crawford wiped away tears as she acknowledged the appreciation of the crowd, knowing that her students had just delivered the performance of their lifetimes. But as the applause began to die down, something unexpected happened. Instead of the anticipated closing ceremony, the music director raised her hand for silence and stepped forward to address the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system, "tonight we have celebrated 7 decades of unwavering service and dedication. We have honored the past, celebrated the present, and looked forward to the future. But our celebration would not be complete without acknowledging the person who has been at the center of it all." A murmur ran through the crowd as people began to realize that something special was about to happen. Phones were raised, cameras focused, and thousands of people held their breath in anticipation. "It is therefore my tremendous honor," Mrs. Crawford continued, "to invite you to welcome someone very special who has chosen to join us tonight. From the Eastern Pathway, accompanied by a small security detail, Queen Elizabeth II emerged into the light." The crowd's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Gasps of surprise turned into cheers of joy as people realized that they were witnessing something truly extraordinary. Many had never seen the Queen in person, and her unexpected appearance transformed an already memorable evening into something historic. The Queen walked slowly but steadily toward the stage, her simple elegance and quiet dignity commanding the attention of everyone present. She paused occasionally to wave at the crowd, her familiar smile bringing tears to the eyes of veterans and young families alike. Camera flashes created a galaxy of lights around her as people scrambled to capture this unexpected moment. Emma and her fellow choir members stood frozen in amazement as they realized what was happening. The Queen they had been singing about, the monarch they had been celebrating, was walking directly toward them. Emma felt her heart racing as she tried to process the magnitude of the moment. Sarah watched from the control booth as her carefully planned closing ceremony evolved into something entirely unscripted. The technical challenges were immense. Cameras had to be redirected, audio levels adjusted, and crowd management protocols activated, but the magic of the moment made every difficulty worthwhile. As the Queen reached the edge of the stage, Inspector Williams and his team took their positions around the perimeter while remaining as unobtrusive as possible. The Queen paused at the steps leading up to the stage level, looking up at the children who had just delivered such a beautiful performance. Emma found herself directly in the Queen's line of sight, and for a moment that seemed to last forever, they looked at each other across the decades that separated their ages. The Queen's eyes were kind and twinkling with amusement at the girl's obvious surprise and excitement. With assistance from stage personnel, the Queen climbed the few steps to join the children on stage. The crowd fell into respectful silence, understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented and profound. Even the media personnel, trained to remain professional in any situation, found themselves moved by the simple power of the moment. The Queen positioned herself among the children, her presence transforming the stage into something almost sacred. Emma found herself standing directly beside the monarch, close enough to notice the delicate lace on her dress and the way the stage lights reflected off her pearl necklace. Mrs. Crawford, nearly overcome with emotion, approached with a respectful curtsy. "Your Majesty, it is an unexpected honor to have you join us tonight." "The honor is entirely mine," the Queen replied, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone system. "These children have given us a performance of extraordinary beauty, and I wanted to personally thank them for their dedication and talent." The audience responded with sustained applause that seemed to echo endlessly across the grounds. People were openly weeping with joy, understanding that they were witnessing a moment of genuine connection between the monarch and her people that transcended ceremony and protocol. As the applause finally subsided, the Queen turned to address both the performers and the audience, creating what would become one of the most remembered speeches in the history of royal appearances. Standing among the children on the stage, Queen Elizabeth II looked out over the thousands of faces illuminated by the warm glow of the stage lights. The moment felt suspended in time, as if the entire kingdom was holding its breath. She had given countless speeches throughout her reign, but this impromptu address would be delivered without notes, without preparation, straight from the heart. "My dear friends," she began, her voice carrying the authority and warmth that had comforted the nation through decades of change. "I had planned to watch tonight's magnificent celebration from the comfort of my sitting room, enjoying your performances on television as so many others around the world are doing." A gentle laugh rippled through the audience as people appreciated her honesty and humor. But as I watched the dedication and love that each performer brought to this stage, I realized that I could not remain absent from such a remarkable demonstration of the spirit that makes our nation great. Emma stood transfixed beside the Queen, hardly believing that she was part of this historic moment. The other children maintained their positions perfectly, though their eyes were wide with wonder and excitement. Mrs. Crawford watched from the side of the stage, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed her students becoming part of royal history. "Tonight, you have taken us on a journey through 7 decades," the Queen continued. "And in doing so, you have reminded us that history is not just about dates and events, but about people. It is about the choices we make, the values we cherish, and the legacy we leave for future generations." In the audience, Claire Mitchell used her phone to record every word, knowing that Emma would want to watch this moment over and over again in the years to come. Around her, families from across the United Kingdom stood in respectful silence, many with tears in their eyes as they witnessed their monarch's unexpected appearance. The Queen paused, looking directly at the children surrounding her. "These young voices have reminded us tonight that our greatest strength has always been our people. From the industrial workers who rebuilt Britain after the war, to the immigrants who enriched our culture, to the innovators who changed our world, and to these children who represent our future. Sarah watched from the control booth as television ratings around the world spiked dramatically. News of the Queen's surprise appearance had spread instantly through social media, and millions of additional viewers were tuning in to witness this unprecedented moment. The technical crew worked seamlessly to ensure that every word was captured clearly for posterity. "I've been privileged to serve as your queen for 70 years, she continued, "and in that time, I have witnessed remarkable changes. We have seen technology transform how we communicate, travel, and understand our world. We have welcomed new citizens from every corner of the globe, creating a society that is more diverse and vibrant than ever before." Lord Pemberton, watching from his position in the audience, reflected on the many conversations he had shared with the Queen about the changing nature of British society. She had always embraced progress while maintaining respect for tradition, and her words tonight reflected that careful balance. But through all these changes, certain values have remained constant. The importance of duty, the power of service, the strength that comes from unity in diversity, and the belief that we are stronger together than we could ever be apart. The Queen's gaze moved across the audience, taking in the faces of veterans wearing their service medals, young families introducing their children to royal tradition, and visitors from Commonwealth nations who had traveled great distances to be part of this celebration. Tonight's performance has demonstrated these values beautifully. Performers from different backgrounds, different generations, and different traditions have come together to tell our shared story. They have shown us that our differences are not divisions, but contributions to a richer, more complete narrative. Emma felt overwhelmed by the significance of the words being spoken just inches away from her. She would later tell her friends that she could feel the history being made in that moment, though she couldn't fully understand its importance until years later. "As I look at these remarkable children," the Queen said, turning slightly toward the choir, "I see the future of our nation. They represent hope, creativity, and the endless possibility that comes with each new generation. Their performance tonight has moved me deeply, not just because of their talent, but because of the joy and dedication they have brought to honoring our shared heritage." Mrs. Crawford stepped forward slightly, overwhelmed by the recognition her students were receiving. The months of preparation, the long rehearsals, and the careful attention to every detail had culminated in this extraordinary moment of royal acknowledgement. "I want to thank every performer who participated tonight," the Queen continued, "from the military bands who opened our celebration with such precision and dignity, to the dancers who brought our history to life with such creativity and energy, to these beautiful children who have closed our evening with such grace and innocence." The audience burst into spontaneous applause, the sound washing over the stage like a wave of appreciation and love. The performers, many of whom had worked for months preparing for this evening, felt their efforts validated in the most meaningful way possible. As the applause subsided, the Queen's expression became more serious, though still warm and approachable. "In recent years, I have stepped back from many public duties, recognizing that the time has come for the next generation to take on greater responsibilities. This transition has not always been easy, as these occasions and the connection they provide with the people of our nation have been among my greatest joys." Margaret Fleming, watching from the side of the stage, understood the personal significance of these words. The Queen's decision to reduce her public appearances had been difficult, driven by practical necessities rather than personal preference. But tonight has reminded me why these connections matter so deeply. When we gather together to celebrate our shared values and common purpose, we strengthen the bonds that make us a nation. We honor our past while embracing our future, and we demonstrate that the institutions we cherish can evolve while maintaining their essential character. The Queen paused, seeming to gather her thoughts for the conclusion of her impromptu address. Around the grounds, people leaned forward slightly, not wanting to miss a single word of what they understood was a historically significant speech. "So let me say to each of you, whether you performed tonight or simply attended to show your support. Thank you for reminding an old woman why she's been so proud to serve this remarkable nation for 7 decades. The phrase "old woman" drew gentle laughter from the audience, who appreciated her self-deprecating humor even in such a formal moment. Let me also say that while I may attend fewer public events in the years to come, my commitment to the values we have celebrated tonight remains unchanged. Service, duty, compassion, and unity will continue to guide not just the monarchy, but all of us as we face the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. Emma felt her heart swelling with pride as she realized that she would forever be able to say she stood beside the Queen during one of her final public speeches. The magnitude of the moment was beginning to sink in, and she understood that this evening had transformed from a simple performance into something truly historic. In closing, the Queen said, her voice carrying a note of finality that made everyone listen even more intently, "I want to leave you with the words that these beautiful children sang so movingly tonight. Through years of joy and sorrow, through changes time has brought, we stand united in tomorrow, bound by all that you have taught." She turned to smile at Emma and the other children as she quoted their song, creating a moment of connection that would be remembered and cherished for generations. Those words capture perfectly the spirit of tonight's celebration and the hope that sustains us all. We are bound together by our shared experiences, our common values, and our commitment to building a better future for those who will come after us. The Queen paused one final time, looking out over the sea of faces that had gathered to honor her reign. In that moment, the formal barriers between monarch and subject seemed to dissolve, replaced by something more fundamental and human. "God save our gracious nation," she concluded, "and may the bonds that unite us tonight continue to strengthen us in all the years to come." The audience erupted in the most sustained and heartfelt applause of the entire evening, but it was soon joined by something even more moving: the spontaneous singing of "God Save the Queen" by thousands of voices raised together in unity and appreciation. The spontaneous singing of a national anthem created a moment of pure magic that no amount of planning could have achieved. Thousands of voices joined together across the Windsor grounds, from the youngest children in the audience to elderly veterans who had served the crown for decades. The sound rose into the night sky, carrying with it the emotions and memories of an entire nation. Emma found herself singing alongside the Queen, their voices blending with those of her fellow choir members and the vast audience beyond. The simple melody that every British child learned seemed transformed in this moment, becoming something deeper and more meaningful than mere tradition. It was a prayer, a celebration, and a promise all woven together in perfect harmony. Sarah watched from the control booth as camera crews captured every angle of this unprecedented scene. The images being broadcast around the world showed the Queen standing among children, her face reflecting genuine joy and connection. Social media exploded with messages of surprise and delight as people shared their reactions to witnessing history in the making. As the final notes of the anthem faded into the night air, the Queen turned to address the children directly. Her voice, no longer amplified by the microphone system, was soft and personal as she spoke to each young performer. "You have given me a gift tonight that I will treasure always," she told them. "Your beautiful voices and your dedication to this performance represent everything that is hopeful and wonderful about our future." Mrs. Crawford approached with another respectful curtsy, still hardly believing that her students were receiving personal attention from Monarch. "Your Majesty, the children have prepared something special, if you would permit us to present it." The Queen nodded with obvious curiosity as Emma stepped forward, her initial nervousness replaced by a sense of purpose. In her hands, she carried a leather-bound book that the choir had created during their months of preparation. "Your Majesty," Emma said, her young voice clear and confident, "we made this book to remember tonight, but now we want you to have it so you can remember us too." The book contained photographs from their rehearsals, copies of the sheet music they had performed, and personal messages from each child about what the Queen and her service meant to them. Emma opened it carefully to show pages filled with drawings, poems, and heartfelt notes written in the careful handwriting of primary school students. The Queen accepted the book with obvious emotion, holding it carefully as she examined the colorful pages. "This is absolutely beautiful," she said, her voice catching slightly. "I can see how much thought and care you put into every page." She paused at a drawing Emma had contributed, showing Windsor Castle with musical notes floating around it like butterflies. "Did you draw this?" she asked, looking directly at the young girl. Emma nodded shyly, suddenly feeling overwhelmed by the personal attention. "I thought the music tonight would fly around the castle and make it happy," she explained. The Queen smiled warmly at this innocent explanation. "I think you're absolutely right. Music does have the power to make places and people happy. You have certainly made me very happy tonight." As the Queen continued to examine the book, members of her security detail discreetly signaled that it was time to consider concluding the appearance. Inspector Williams approached Margaret Fleming with a gentle reminder about the Queen's stamina and the need to maintain reasonable limits on her public exposure. But the Queen seemed energized by the interaction with the children and the genuine warmth of the crowd's response. She closed the book carefully and looked out over the audience one more time, as if trying to memorize every detail of the moment. "I think," she announced, her voice once again carrying through the microphone system, "that this evening calls for something special to mark such an extraordinary celebration." She turned to Mrs. Crawford with a request that surprised everyone present. "Would your beautiful choir be willing to sing once more? Not a formal performance, but simply the joy of children's voices raised together in celebration." Mrs. Crawford looked to her students, who responded with enthusiastic nods despite their tiredness from the long day. Emma felt a surge of energy as she realized they would have another chance to sing for the Queen. "What would you like us to sing, Your Majesty?" Mrs. Crawford asked. The Queen considered for a moment, then smiled with obvious delight. "Do they know Happy Birthday? After all, this celebration is something of a birthday party for my reign, and I think a birthday song would be perfectly appropriate." The children laughed at the unexpected request, and Mrs. Crawford quickly organized them into their formation. The audience watched with amazement as the most formal monarch in the world prepared to receive a birthday song from a children's choir in the middle of one of the grandest celebrations in royal history. Emma counted off for her fellow singers, and their voices rose together in the familiar melody that transcended all formal protocol. "Happy birthday to you! Happy birthday to you! Happy birthday, dear Your Majesty! Happy birthday to you!" The Queen clapped along with obvious delight, her formal demeanor replaced by something much more personal and human. The audience joined in the clapping, and soon the entire grounds resonated with the rhythm of the simple celebration song. As the song concluded, the Queen applauded the children with genuine enthusiasm. "That was perfect," she declared. "Absolutely perfect. I cannot imagine a more wonderful way to conclude such a remarkable evening." Lord Pemberton, watching from his position in the audience, reflected on the many royal celebrations he had attended over the decades. None had captured the genuine connection between monarch and people quite like this spontaneous interaction between the Queen and the children. Margaret Fleming approached the stage carefully, knowing that the time had come to facilitate the Queen's departure. The evening had exceeded every expectation, but the Queen's health and stamina required careful management. "Your Majesty," she said quietly, "perhaps we should consider concluding your appearance while this perfect moment remains fresh in everyone's memory." The Queen nodded with obvious reluctance. She turned to the children one final time, and Emma was surprised to see tears forming in the monarch's eyes. "Thank you," she said simply, "for reminding me why I have loved serving this nation for 70 years. Your voices, your enthusiasm, and your pure joy have given me a gift that I will carry with me always." She paused to shake hands with several of the children, including Emma, who would later tell everyone she knew about the gentle warmth of the Queen's handshake and the kindness in her eyes. As the Queen prepared to leave the stage, the audience rose spontaneously to their feet in a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. People waved flags, wiped away tears, and applauded with an intensity that reflected their understanding of the historic significance of what they had just witnessed. The Queen walked slowly toward the eastern pathway, pausing frequently to wave at the crowd. Her departure was as graceful and dignified as her arrival had been surprising, but the impact of her presence would resonate long after she disappeared from view. Sarah stood in the control booth, surrounded by monitors showing the reactions of audiences around the world. Television networks were already calling this the most significant royal appearance in decades, a spontaneous moment of connection that reminded people why the monarchy remained relevant in the modern era. As the Queen's sedan departed the grounds, the formal closing ceremony continued with fireworks that painted the night sky in brilliant colors above Windsor Castle. But everyone present understood that the real finale had already occurred when a 96-year-old woman chose to surprise her people with one final demonstration of her commitment to service. Emma stood with her fellow choir members, still clutching the program that the Queen had signed for her during their brief conversation. Years later, as an adult, she would understand the full significance of the evening when she stood among 47 other children and received personal recognition from one of history's most remarkable monarchs. The crowds began to disperse slowly, reluctant to leave the scene of such an extraordinary celebration. Families walked together toward the exits, children asleep in their parents' arms, veterans supporting each other as they navigated the pathways, and visitors from around the world comparing photos and videos of the evening's events. In newsrooms across the globe, editors worked frantically to capture the significance of the Queen's surprise appearance. Headlines were being rewritten, television programs extended, and social media platforms struggled to handle the volume of posts sharing videos and photos of the historic moment. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. In hospitals and care homes across the United Kingdom, elderly residents who had watched the entire celebration on television called their families to share their emotions about witnessing their monarch's final public appearance. Margaret Fleming returned to the Queen's private sitting room to find her employer examining the handmade book the children had presented. Each page seemed to hold her attention, and she read every message carefully, smiling at the innocent observations and heartfelt expressions of gratitude. "They drew me with a crown made of flowers," the Queen observed, showing Margaret a particularly charming illustration. "I think that might be more comfortable than the real thing." As the evening drew to a close, Sarah and James completed their final coordination tasks, ensuring that all performers were safely transported back to their accommodations and that the grounds were secured for the night. The technical challenges of the evening seemed insignificant compared to the magical moments they had helped facilitate. Emma fell asleep in the bus on the way back to Manchester, her head resting against the window as she dreamed of singing with the Queen. Her mother sat beside her, holding the sign program and reflecting on how one evening had created memories that would last their entire family a lifetime. The pageant had officially ended, but its impact would continue to resonate through the stories shared by everyone who witnessed the Queen's surprise appearance. In years to come, they would tell their children and grandchildren about the night when protocol gave way to humanity, when formality was replaced by genuine connection, and when the most famous woman in the world chose to spend her final public moments singing Happy Birthday with a children's choir under the stars at Windsor Castle.